All right, welcome to BIO211. This is our first chapter for lecture on the nervous system. It's a continuation from what you've learned in BIO210. You learned about the nervous system organization and then the brain and cranial nerves, as well as the spinal cord and spinal nerves. And then you learned about the autonomic nervous system. So this is kind of springboarding off of that and pulling a lot of that together to talk about the senses. And this first video will just be an introduction to the chapter. So there's a couple of definitions just to get us going here. Hopefully you remember the term stimulus from BIO210. You see that a lot in those feedback loop diagrams that you saw all throughout BIO210. They're not gone. You're going to see lots of them in this course as well. So a stimulus is just any event that's going to elicit a response. And here, since we're talking about senses, it's going to be an event that produces a sensation. Whenever these nerve impulses, these action potentials reach the brain, you're going to get a conscious awareness. So that's a sensation, is conscious awareness of a stimulus. The stimulus is the actual event. So, if it's a sound, for example, the sound would be the stimulus. And then once the action potentials travel through the nerves and get to your brain, once you're aware of the sound, that's the sensation. There is a lot going on in our brain, as I'm sure you're well aware, but it would be sensory overload, like this little cartoon is showing you, if we were aware of absolutely every stimulus that is going on in our body, around our body, in the internal world and the external world around us. So not all of the stimuli that are around our body or in our body are going to be eliciting sensations. So just, keep that in mind, and thank goodness, right? Because we'd go crazy if so. You should be familiar with receptors, but we're going to dive deeper and talk about the different types of receptors. So a receptor, you should remember from 210, is a structure that's going to detect the stimuli. And here we're going to talk a little bit more about how they do that. They're actually called transducers, and a transducer is something that can do an energy transformation. So what's happening here is you have a certain form of energy in the stimulus. Maybe it's sound energy, like I was just talking about when you hear a sound. And the transducer or the receptor is going to transform this sound energy into a different type of energy. And generally, we're transforming that into electrical energy in the form of a nerve impulse or an action potential. So it's all about energy transformations, and we learned a little bit about energy in BIO210. We're just going to review the basics here in this chapter as well, but again, here's a really good example of some sound waves coming in through your ear, and then we're going to learn these structures later in the course, in this chapter actually. You're transforming this sound wave energy into hearing, essentially, through cranial nerves, sending action potentials to your brain. And similar stuff is happening in your eye with vision. So you're transforming light energy into action potentials, and that action potential travels to your brain where it's integrated. So way more on those specifically as we get to the different sections of this chapter. So another thing is called sensory adaptation. I'm sure you've all had similar experiences where, you put your glasses on your head, or maybe it's a necklace that you forgot you were wearing, or your earrings or something like that. You kind of forget about it after a while. So that's this thing called sensory adaptation. And what's happening here is if you have a continuous stimulus, you're not going to continuously send this information to your brain that, hey, I'm wearing these dangly earrings, or hey, there's a necklace around my neck, or hey, there's glasses on top of my head, because your brain's getting the signal that, oh, it's there, oh, it's still there, oh, it's still there. And so it just kind of turns off that sensitivity until the necklace moves or the glasses slightly shift or something like that, till there's a new form of that stimulus coming in. You also think about it maybe in the morning when you get dressed, you think about putting your clothes on, but you don't think about those clothes touching your skin for the rest of the day usually. So those are just a couple different examples of this thing called sensory adaptation. So it's adapting to the constant stimulus. All right, so let's get into how these receptors are going to be classified. There's different ways to classify them. First, we have classifying the receptors based on their distribution. So here we have different categories. Some receptors are in the general senses. These are going to be simple receptors, and there are different categories here, so little subcategories. You have somatic receptors. You should have learned that term in BIO211. Somatic receptors are always found in skin, muscles, joints. Anytime you see that, you should link up the word somatic to those regions in your body. And then you have visceral receptors, and you should have learned this term in 210 as well. Visceral always refers to your internal organs. So these are always going to be referring to either the skin, muscles, and joints or your internal organs. So that's two ways to classify your general senses. You also have your special senses. So this is the opposite of general senses. So you could make a chart, and you can say general and special and list your little examples underneath each. And these all grouped together this is distribution. So that's a good way when you're taking notes of kind of keeping things grouped that belong together, meaning general senses and special senses are both types of distribution classifications, but how is general different than special? So think about that as you take your notes. Special senses are going to be really complex receptors, whereas, it was simple receptors in the general senses. These are going to be really specialized, and they're all located in the head. So they're cephalic, if you remember that word from BIO210. So you've probably heard of your five senses. These are going to be listed over here. This is a chart from your book. This is another way of grouping your thoughts and kind of making these visual flow chart types of diagrams. So let's just take it from the top actually. You've got your senses, and this is distribution patterns. So either localized within specific organs, and that's going to usually be in the head, or distributed over large parts of your body. So distributed over large parts of your body is going to be the general senses. Skin, muscle, joints are your somatic. That's going to be touch, pressure, proprioception, which we'll talk about in a minute, temperature and pain. And then your visceral general senses receptors, which are for pain and pressure. And those are for your internal organs. And then your special senses. So again, these are mostly clustered in your specific organs in your head. This is smell, taste, sight, and then hearing and balance. And we're going to go through these in much more detail. We'll go through these in a little bit more detail. All right, so the second way of classifying receptors is by the origin of the stimulus. So does that stimulus originate outside of the body or in the body, things like that. So you have three different groups here that you need to know. Exteroceptors, ext for exterior or external. These types of receptors detect stimuli from outside of your body, so external stimuli. Interoceptors, like internal. They detect stimuli from the internal body. And then proprioceptors, these detect stimuli about your body's movements or your limbs, your arms and your legs movements. So what you're getting here is you're just kind of building First, you can identify it as a general sensory receptor or a special sensory receptor. And now you're going to say, okay, is it extero, intero, or proprio, based on the origin of the stimulus? So you would add these all up together. It's not just one or the other. It's one from each classification group to describe a receptor. The third way that we'll classify the receptors is by the modality of the stimulus or how it works. That's what modality means, like what mode does it use? And you've got a few different examples here. This is not a picture from your book. I pulled this from our old book. So here you have nociceptors. Nociceptors detect painful stimuli. So you've cut your finger there, and it would be nociceptors that are in your skin that detect that pain. You have thermoreceptors. Thermo means temperature or heat. So this is going to be, of course, detecting changes in temperature. You've got these all spread out through your skin as well. And you talked about them a little bit back in BIO211 when you discussed body temperature regulation as an example of negative feedback way back in chapter 1. Let's see, but you would have those on the inside of the body and the outside of the body. Then you have chemoreceptors. Chemoreceptors are going to detect chemicals that are dissolved in some sort of fluid. So whether that's your blood or the cytoplasm or the fluid in between your cells, you can detect chemical. Maybe it's in your mouth, in your saliva. Lots of chemoreceptors all over the place as well. And then mechanoreceptors detect some sort of movement or distortion of your cell membranes. So it's a mechanics or machinery type of movement for your cells. And a specific example of that is the baroreceptors. And baro, like barometric pressure, for example. Baro means pressure. So you've got baroreceptors, which are a type of mechanoreceptor. These detect pressure changes, and you've probably already guessed this would be really important for monitoring your blood pressure. So all along some of your blood vessel walls, you've got these baroreceptors to monitor and adjust blood pressure. All right, and then photoreceptors. Photo means light. So photoreceptors are going to detect changes in light, whether it's light intensity, the color of the light, or the movement of the light. And you're going to, of course, have a lot of these in your eye, and we'll get to that later in this chapter. So those are the different modalities for the stimuli. So what you do is, like I said, you're going to classify a receptor based on all three of these classifications. So let's go over one together, and then you can work on these other ones and ask me questions. So looking at your eye, let's talk about vision. So let's say that you see a dog walking down the street towards you. So the receptor distribution, would that be, well, what would that be? Look back through your notes. And where would the stimulus originate? So what's the origin of the stimulus? And what's the modality of the stimulus? So pause your video, go back through your notes, and see what you come up with. All right, so you should have come up with these answers. It is a special sense receptor distribution, not general senses. This is one of the special senses. It's located in the head, the eyeballs. Stimulus origin is going to be from outside of the body because you see a dog walking towards you. That's, of course, not inside of your body. So that's an exteroceptor. And then the modality is going to be a photoreceptor. So you've got photoreceptors in the back of your eye. Even though you don't know that right now, you know that you're detecting vision with light. So hopefully you know that already. If not, you'll know it by the end of this chapter. So that's an example of how we would classify these receptors that detect vision. So try some others. I put some others up here, like maybe some things you remember from BIO211, the Pacinian corpuscles, for example. in your skin, in your dermis. Maybe it's the stomach. You could think about detecting whether there's food there or not. And your tongue. How do you think your tongue's receptors work? And then here's that muscle spindle that you learned in the spinal cord chapter of BIO211. So how do you think that works? So try those out. Try to come up with an answer for all three of those and let me know if you have questions. We can discuss this in class. Another little question for you. Why doesn't your stomach or intestine burn the way your mouth does if you eat spicy food? So think about that one. And I'll just ask you in class, so think about it. Here is a really good summary chart, and it goes over all that stuff that I just talked about. It's a good way to keep your thoughts organized. So, you know, when you're taking notes, you can kind of mimic some of these tables and charts and diagrams that are in your book. Writing things in your own handwriting really helps your memory. So I know it takes time, and you should not copy this word for word, but it gives you extra examples, and it gives you a good way of organizing things over here on the left. So really good to summarize and kind of mimic these things to help you study. All right, that's the first video. We'll pick back up on olfaction.